Hey friends, Kenji here for another YouTube video here on, well, YouTube. This one is going to be a rare set review of sorts for the new set Murders at Karlov Manor. And what we plan on doing here is not a full set review, but what I'm going to do is go over my top 3 commons and top uncommon for limited gameplay, so draft and sealed. Thanks for watching. As always, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe. This video is actually sponsored by Wizards of the Coast, so shoutouts to them for sponsoring today's video. And don't forget to check out your local game store for your pre-releases and release events for Murders at Karlov Manor. Let's jump right into the format. They've actually given us some of the archetypes for Murders at Karlov Manor, specifically for draft and sealed, so let's go over them real quick. White-blue is the detective archetype. Blue-black is the clues control. Black-red, suspect aggro. Red-green, big disguise. Green-white, go wide disguise. Black-white, pint-sized disguise. There are a lot of disguises apparently. Blue-red, artifact sacrifice. Green-black, grave break. Red-white, battalion. Green-blue, collect evidence. So you can see kind of a theme going on with a lot of these, and that'll tie in a lot to my top picks as well, the top 3 commons and uncommon of the format. Now, as this is Ravnica, there are a bunch of multicolor cards in the format as well, the plane of Ravnica, that is to say. So expect to see a lot of splash cards in your drafts and sealed environments. I expect to see a lot of multicolored cards, more than the norm. Let's start things off by looking at the top 3 commons and uncommon in white, and we'll go in Wooburg white, blue, black, red, green order from there on out. First off, we have the Novice Inspector. This is a 1-mana 1/2 human detective that when it enters the battlefield, you get to investigate. This is a functional reprint of Thraben Inspector, if you remember that card from back in the day. But this one, pretty darn good as well, as there are going to be a lot of synergies in the format with clues, sacrificing them, or even in a pinch you get to draw a card. So for 1 mana, you really can't ask for much more. I expect Novice Inspector to be a very good white common. Next up, we have the Museum Nightwatch. This is 4 mana for a 3/2 Centaur Soldier. When it dies, you create a 2/2 white and blue detective creature token. Furthermore, this has Disguise for a white and 1, which this is kind of bringing back the morph and the flip mechanics of creatures. If you remember that disguises are actually a little bit more powerful because the creature has ward 2. So first and foremost, you can cast this on turn 3 as a 2/2 with ward 2, which means it's not going to usually die unless the opponent has a really cheap removal spell, right? And then later on, it generally trades up, I would say, as a 3-power creature, and when it dies, you get a little bit of value. Plus, detective creatures in the format have some relevant abilities, so you staple this all on a common, and really you have something really, really potent. I expect disguise creatures, the face-down creatures, to be tremendous in the format like they have been in other formats. Next up, we have Makeshift Binding. This is going to be White's classic removal spell at common. In this format, this is a white and 2 for an enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, you exile target creature an opponent controls until it leaves the battlefield, and you gain 2 life. So similar to a lot of other cards we've seen previously, I think most recently, like Prayer of Binding does something very similar, if you remember that one. Enters, exiles a creature, you gain 2 life. Enchantments normally aren't very interactable in limited, so it's generally just going to deal with the creature outright. And at a common, you can really expect this card to do some good work. So for the uncommon I have listed, it is the Karlov Haunch. This is a white mana for an artifact food equipment, food notably. The equipped creature gets +2/+0. You can pay 2 and tap it, sacrifice the Haunch, you gain 3 life. Okay. Fine, nice ability. When it's put into a graveyard from the battlefield, you may pay a white and 1. If you do, you make 2 1/1 white dog creature tokens, and it's 2 to equip. So this is reminiscent of like a Bone Splitters on steroids, if you will, right? It's 1 to play. It is 2 to equip, which is a little bit more expensive, but +2/+0 is very good in terms of combat stats. And then remember, equipment does not tap to equip or anything like that. So unless you've tapped it some other way, if you just have 2 mana open, you can sacrifice it, and then 2 more mana, of course, to make 2 more 1/1s. So I have Karlov Haunch as the top uncommon. Let's move on to blues commons now, the top 3 blue commons I have listed, starting off with the Crime Stopper Sprite, 1 blue and 2 colorless for a creature fairy detective. It's a 2/2. As an additional cost to cast this spell, you may collect evidence 6. Collecting evidence is a new mechanic in this format, where you exile cards with total mana value of the listed evidence or greater from your graveyard. So this one is exiling total mana value 6 or greater. It's got flying, and when it enters the battlefield, you tap a creature. If evidence was collected, you put a stun counter on it. So baseline, you have no cards in your graveyard or fewer total mana value than 6. It's a 3 mana 2/2 flyer that taps something down for the turn and maybe lets you attack. When you do get later in the game, or you've put a bunch of cards in your graveyard, this acts as a Frostlinks / other flyer that can tap down and keep a creature locked down. So at common, I think this card is great. Next, we'll go with the Projector Inspector. This is a blue 2 creature human detective, so another detective. It's a 3/2 that whenever Projector Inspector or another detective enters the battlefield under your control, and whenever a detective you control is turned face up, you may draw a card. If you do, discard a card. So on the surface, this seems like just a decent value card, but realistically, this type of common is going to do you a lot of work as the game progresses. Presumably, you're going to have some other face-down creatures, some other disguised creatures that are detectives that you can get value from, or just more detectives in your deck. Like the ability to loot and smooth out your draws of too many lands or too many non-lands is really, really clutch. So I think a common like this is actually pretty good. Next, we have the Dramatic Accusation, kind of in theme with the other white common we were talking about. This is a blue and 2 for a removal spell. It's an enchantment aura that when it enters the battlefield, you tap enchanted creature. The enchanted creature doesn't untap during its controller's untap step. And then it has this extra useful ability of you can pay 2 blue to shuffle the enchanted creature into its owner's library. So at first glance, this just looks like a 3 mana blue removal spell, a tap down removal spell, which we've seen in limited formats. Remember, because of Disguise, this actually has a little bit more utility. You can shuffle the creature back into your opponent's library, and that's effectively killing it. Obviously, they can redraw it later, but that puts a 3 mana spell in your graveyard for Disguise purposes. So you might not notice it at first, but it actually has quite a bit of synergy with a lot of the Disguise cards in the format. Let's go to Blue's uncommon I have, and this is the Exit Specialist. This is a very nice card. It's a blue and 1 for a creature human detective that is a 2/1. It's got Disguise for a blue and 1, so you can play it face down for 3 as a 2/2 ward with 2 ward rather, and then you can pay the 1 blue and flip it. When you turn it face up, you return another target creature to its owner's hand. This is going to be a very annoying card to play against. We've actually seen other types of morph flip creatures like this. I think the oldest one being like the Echo Tracer from whatever that format was back in the day. Anyways, in any case, this card is just very good. It's a detective. It can't be blocked by creatures with power 3. I mean, just looking at all of the text on this card, all of it is good. So I expect this to be a very, very high pickup. And you have to recall with limited formats that have face down cards, you can just throw these cards in your deck even if you don't have very many blue sources, because the worst case scenario, it's going to be a 3 mana 2/2 ward 2, right? And then if you eventually draw your Disguise mana, you can flip it up and get good value. So nice blue uncommon there. Let's move on to Black's commons. First off, I have the Cerebral Confiscation. This is a black and 2 for a sorcery where you get to choose 1. Target opponent discards 2 cards, so a Mind Rot, or target opponent reveals their hand. You choose a non-land card from it. That player discards that card. I think that's the coercion effect. This is just a nice versatile card. Depending on the point in the game, you might want your opponent to discard 2, or you might want to, take a peek at their hand and choose 1 super relevant card. Generally, you're making your opponent discard 2 later in the game when they only have 2 or 3 cards left in their hand, and you're using the second mode of, specificity earlier when they still have quite a few. The reason I have this as a top common is because Magic cards these days are just broken. Creatures, especially when they enter the battlefield, they oftentimes have an effect. So even if you do have a removal spell for them, the opponent still got some amount of value. So if you can nab them before they're resolved with the card that discards cards like Cerebral Confiscation, you actually tend to get more value these days than you would back in the day. Furthermore, this is a nice 3 mana spell to put in your graveyard for Disguise. So next up, we have another classic black card. This is just straight up murder. Black, 1, instant, destroy target creature. Not much needs to be said about this, although going to my previous point, Again, creatures these days are just a lot better than normal. While still a very good pickup, it's not as good as it used to be. In fact, if you're gonna try to murder a disguise creature, that costs 5 mana because of Ward 2, you know? So murder's great, don't quote me on that. Murder's great. Remember, creatures these days are OP. Next up, we have the Alley Assailant. This is a black 2 for a creature vampire rogue that is a 3/3. It enters the battlefield tapped. Okay, that can be annoying sometimes, but it is a disguise creature, which means, again, you can cast it face down for 3 mana as a ward 2/2, and then you can flip it up for its disguise cost of 2 black and 4. When it is turned face up, target opponent loses 3 life and you gain 3 life. So this is just a really nice creature. Early in the game, you can just play this as a 3 mana 3/3 for curve purposes if you really want to, if it's better than a 2/2. But then later in the game, or if you've opted to cast as a 2/2 initially, you get a really good amount of value. Like, this is gonna finish off opponents kind of out of nowhere. Like, it's a little bit of black reach, if that makes sense. Let's move on to our black uncommon, and that is the Soul Enervation. Black and 3 for an enchantment with flash in black, oddly enough. When it enters the battlefield, target creature gets -4/-4 until end of turn. Whenever one or more creature cards leave your graveyard, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. Just a very, very solid removal spell. A little bit better than cards like Murder, I would say. Even though Murder can deal with anything, this gets you a lot of value after it's resolved. Flash, basically an instant speed black removal spell, and then it has synergy again with disguise cards. This has a lot of value. I expect this one to be pretty good in those type of decks, because draining 1, you know, every once in a while does tend to add up. Let's move on to red now. And first and foremost, I have Galvanize. This is a red and 1 for an instant that deals 3 damage to target creature, or if you've drawn 2 or more cards this turn, Galvanize deals 5 damage to that creature instead. This is a classic red removal spell in Limited. I expect it to be a very, very good card still. And obviously it has some nice synergy with decks that draw multiple cards in any given turn. Next up, we have Demand Answers. This is red and 1 for an instant. As an additional cost to cast this spell, you sacrifice an artifact or discard a card, and you simply draw 2 cards. So we've seen this type of card printed endlessly in various forms in red the last few years. And this is just another nice one, I think. Again, there are clues in the format that you can sacrifice. There are also good collect evidence abilities, as we were mentioning previously before on a bunch of cards. So just a solid red common, I think. You're probably not going to want to draft too many of these, but yeah, you're sure not to mind the first one. Lastly, for commons in red, we have Felonious Rage. This is a red instant for 1. Target creature you control gets +2/+0 and gains haste until end of turn. When that creature dies this turn, you make a 2/2 white and blue detective creature token. Normally, I'm not a big fan of combat tricks like this, but if you're trading up a smaller creature and you're getting a 2/2 relevant creature type detective in the process, I think this is gonna have some good utility. I don't expect myself to run like a ton of these cards, but I bet you this card plays out a lot better than it initially looks. So Felonious Rage for now is gonna have my bet as one of the better red commons. Let's move on to red's uncommon now, and I have that listed as the Harried Dronesmith. This is a red and 3 creature, human artificer. It's a 2/3. At the beginning of combat on your turn, create a 1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature token with flying. It gains haste until end of turn. Sacrifice it at the beginning of your next end step. So standalone, this doesn't look all that amazing, but you have to remember there are a ton of synergies with this type of card in this format, whether it just be having something died or whether you sacrifice it to the aforementioned, you know, Demand Answers or whatever. This card has a lot of utility. I expect it to be a pretty decent one in the red decks. Last but not least, we have green, and I think green is actually pretty amazing here. The first and foremost, we're gonna go with Nervous Gardener. That's a green and 1 for a 2/2 creature dryad with Disguise. The Disguise is simply a single green mana. When Nervous Gardener is turned face up, search your library for a land card with a basic land type. Reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle. So you don't have to just simply grab a basic land. There are lands in the format now that have multiple basic land types. So if you're lucky enough to do that, you can grab one of those. But even if you're only running basics in your deck, this type of green card has always proven to be fantastic in Limited. Worst case scenario, you can cast as a 2 mana 2/2, so quote unquote Grizzly Bear. But for 3 mana, you cast it face down as the ward creature. Again, it's going to be hard to interact with because of the Ward 2. And then simply flipping up for a green and getting a land, that's a fantastic green common. Kind of similar on theme. In fact, all of green's commons, I think, have some similar theme. Next, I have the Topiary Panther. This is green, green 4 for a 6/5 creature, plant, cat. It's got trample, but more importantly, it's got basic land cycling for a green and 1. This one, notably, basic land cycling means you can only grab the basic. But that being said, these type of cards are always just good. Late game, it's a 6/5 trampler. Early game, it helps find you lands. And in fact, this one's not even just finding a forest, right? Discard this card, search your library for a basic land card, any basic land. So you can find a mountain, a plains, an island, even in addition to the forest and swamps or whatever. Topiary Panther, I expect that to be a nice pickup for the green decks. Also, land cycling, you put it in your graveyard. What do you do with cards in your graveyard? You collect evidence. This has 6 mana cost. Last but not least, we have the Tunnel Tipster. This is a green and a 1 for a 1/1 creature Mole Scout. Good old moles. At the beginning of your end step, if a face-down creature entered the battlefield in your control this turn, put a 1/1 counter on Tunnel Tipster. Furthermore, you can tap it to add a green. So, even if this did not have the ability to get larger with 1/1 counters, I still think this would be a good card because this type of creature in limited, you know, a 2-mana 1/1 that adds a green, is generally still solid. The fact that this one also can turn into a threat later on just makes it, I think, put it over the top as a green common. I think green's commons are all really, really cool. They all have basically mana abilities. For the green uncommon, I have the Green Belt Radical. This is a green and 3 for a 4/4 creature Centaur Citizen. It's got disguise. The disguise cost, 7. It's green, green, and 5. But when you flip it face up, you put a 1/1 counter on each creature you control, and then creatures you control gain trample until the end of turn. So this is another fantastic, versatile card. I expect all of the disguise cards to be good in some capacity, because even if you're not even running the color of the disguise card, just the fact that you have it face down as a 3-mana 2/2 with Ward 2 that your opponent's got to be like, okay, what can this be? Can really put your opponent in a rough spot. This format is going to be shaking up to be kind of crazy. I'm not going to go over all the multicolored cards, mainly because the vast majority of the multicolored cards in this format are going to be uncommon or rare. There are some common ones. I will note that the majority of the multicolored cards are going to be in like the namesake color pairings and have some kind of synergy with those. So while I expect the multicolored cards to be a big focal point, I think it's the individually colored commons and like the uncommons I listed that are going to really round out your deck. So hopefully you've enjoyed this little look at my top 3 commons and top uncommon of each color here for Murders at Karlov Manor. I expect great things from the format. Let's see how it shakes out. Caveat, remember, this is without me having played the format. I'm going to come back and revisit this look at the cards that I've put forward here after a couple weeks, and we're going to see how wrong or hopefully how right I was with these card rankings. So thanks again to Wizards for sponsoring this video. Hopefully it was a little bit informative, and hopefully it can help you out in your pre-releases and your release events. Again, don't forget to check out your local game stores. We'll see you on the battlefield. Bye-bye.